Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tackling a really hot topic, one you've probably heard a lot about. Are these big corporate investors the real reason it feels impossible to buy a house right now?
I mean, you've definitely seen headlines just like this one, right? The story they tell is, well, it's pretty simple and frankly kind of alarming. You've got these huge, faceless corporations buying up all the single-family homes, leaving regular folks like you and me out in the cold and sending prices through the roof.
So it's a really compelling story, for sure. But here's the big question. Does the data actually back it up? Well, let's find out. We're going to dive into a pretty detailed paper from the AEI Housing Center that really crunched the numbers to see what's myth and what's reality here.
All right, first things first. The research really tries to unpack who we're actually talking about when we use the word investors. Because, the common story just kind of lumps everyone together. But as you're about to see, the authors of this paper argue that making a distinction here is absolutely crucial.
So you've probably heard a number thrown around like this, right? That investors are buying up a quarter, maybe even a third of all homes for sale. And look, that number can be technically true, but the analysis points out a huge problem. It often mashes together giant Wall Street firms with, small mom-and-pop landlords who might just own one or two other houses.
And this is where the data starts to get really, really interesting. Take a look at this chart. It breaks down all those investor purchases over the last 20 years. See that giant blue section at the bottom? That's your small investors. We're talking people who own between 1 and 9 properties. They've always been the vast majority. Now, see that tiny little sliver way up at the top? Yeah, that's the big institutional guys.
In fact, when the paper looked at the data from the first quarter of 2024, it found that these big institutional investors, and we're defining them as anyone owning over 100 properties, they only bought, wait for it, 1% of all homes. Just 1%. I mean, that is a huge difference from the quarter or a third that you see in all those headlines.
Okay, so that was recent purchases. What about their total ownership of all the houses out there? Well, if you look at their share of the entire single-family housing stock, their footprint gets even smaller. See those two little slices that are circled? You add them up, and institutional investors own just 1% of the whole pie. That's it.
All right, so maybe their national footprint is small. But what about that other argument? The one that says they're concentrating all their buying power, basically taking over entire cities or specific neighborhoods. Let's look at that.
Well, the data here suggests their ownership isn't widespread at all. It's actually the opposite. It's super targeted. They focus on very specific markets where they can get, economies of scale from managing everything. Get this, 80% of all their properties are in just 5% of U.S. counties. And in more than half the counties in the entire country, they own 0 homes. Nothing.
This map from the report really paints a picture, doesn't it? I mean, look at all that blue and white space. Those are all the places where these big investors have pretty much 0 presence. You can clearly see how all the activity is clustered in just a few regions, mostly in the southeast and the southwest.
And check this out. Even if we zoom way in on 2 of the places they target the most, Atlanta and Houston, the data shows it's not some blanket takeover. It's really concentrated in just a few zip codes. In Atlanta, the highest they get in any one zip code is around 12%. And in Houston, no single zip code even hits 10%. Okay, so this brings us to what's probably the most serious accusation of all, that these investors are the main reason we have a housing shortage, because they're the ones buying up the already limited supply of homes.
And this argument, which you can see articulated right here by New York's governor, is a big deal. It's the whole reason why more than 20 states are looking at laws to restrict or even ban these investors. The idea is super simple. Get them out of the market, and houses will become affordable again. But the paper really asks, does that logic actually hold up to scrutiny?
Now, this next chart, this is really the heart of the paper's entire argument. See the big blue bars on the left? That's the estimated housing shortage for each state as a percentage. And those little tiny orange bars over on the right, that's how much of the housing stock institutional investors actually own. See the difference?
Just look at the numbers for a couple of states with huge affordability problems. California, right? Their housing shortage is estimated at a massive 15%, and institutional ownership, a tiny 0.2%. Or how about New York? The shortage is over 11%, while investors own just 0.1%. The authors basically say the scales are so completely different, it's like blaming a dripping faucet for a catastrophic flood. So, if these big investors aren't the main thing driving the crisis, then what is? Well, the research suggests that maybe they're not the cause at all. Maybe they're just a symptom of a much, much deeper problem.
What the authors point to is this: a huge chronic housing shortage.
We're talking a long-term problem. They estimate that the U.S. is short something like 6 million homes. And this didn't just happen overnight. It's a deficit that's been built up over decades, thanks to local government rules, things like restrictive zoning, that have just made it insanely hard and expensive to build anything new.
And this timeline kind of lays it all out. It suggests that investors have just been reacting to what's happening in the market, not actually creating the problems themselves. Think about it. They first showed up in big numbers after the 2008 financial crisis to snap up foreclosed homes, which actually helped stabilize a crashing market. Then, in the 2010s, as the housing shortage got worse, renting just became a really good business. And of course, during the pandemic, when the Fed made money super cheap, buying homes was a great way to protect against inflation. In every case, the research argues, they were just responding to signals that policymakers helped put in place.
So instead of spending all this energy trying to ban what the paper says is a pretty minor player in the market, it wraps up by suggesting a totally different path forward, one that actually goes after the root of the problem. They propose something they called a housing abundance success sequence. It's basically a 3-step playbook for state and local governments. Step 1, legalize more types of housing. Allow smaller lots, let people build in commercial zones. Step 2, make zoning by right. That just means if a project follows all the rules, it can't get blocked by local politics. And step 3, just keep it simple. Make the regulations predictable and clear so that builders can, actually build.
So at the end of the day, this deep dive into the research leaves us with a pretty provocative question, doesn't it? Is all this focus on blaming investors really just a distraction? A convenient way to avoid the much harder, much more politically messy job of actually fixing the rules that have stopped us from building enough homes for everybody? The paper's conclusion is pretty clear. Fix the supply problem and you fix the crisis.